Students of Reddit, what's your, well, that happened moment in the classroom? Story 1. In high school physics, we were waiting for the teacher to show up, and another physics teacher from another class comes in with a bowling ball and says, "Do you guys think I can dribble this?" Everyone just kind of looks at him incredulously, and he begins to repeatedly and heavily strong-arm the bowling ball into the floor hard enough for it to rebound high enough that he can keep the momentum going. People start to laugh, but then, after about 5 or 6 bounces, the ball splits in half as it hits the floor. He quickly scoops up the halves, holds a conspiratorial finger to his lips, and shuffles out the door. About 15 seconds later, our physics teacher comes in, looks at the few dusty chips of bowling ball on the floor, and asks, "What was all that noise? What's this mess on the floor?" Story 2. At my school, we sometimes have drug dogs come and check the lockers. They always announce it like, "Teachers, please do not let students leave the classroom for the next bit of time." Everyone knows what it means, and one kid in my class grabbed his bag and jumped over 3 desks and ran out the classroom. Turns out he was an entrepreneur of sorts. Story 3. Guy with anger issues started yelling at the teacher and then slapped her across the face. Keep in mind this fat kid was huge and the teacher was this old tiny Asian woman. The nicest guy in the class smokes the guy with a sucker right hand and just puts the guy out cold. Story 4. When I fell asleep in the first row, and the professor and the other students started clapping to wake me up, and when I woke up I also started clapping like a moron. Story 5. 2 things you need to know. First, there was this guy at my school whom I've now known for 25 years. His thing is to scream "fuck yeah" at everything. He's done it since I've known him. Anytime someone mentions Matt, someone always adds a "yeah." He is huge and very loud. When he comes in the bar, he announces his presence with an exuberant "fuck yeah." If he calls you, you say hello and he yells "fuck yeah." You get the picture. Second, my senior year, it was a thing to sneak vodka into school in Cinnabon mugs. For some inexplicable reason, plastic Cinnabon mugs were like a huge thing. Sashaying around, flaunting your Cinnabon mug. Rolls eyes. Anyway, I'm in a post-lunch class one day, and one of the Cinnabon vodka girls up and starts puking bright, hot pink fruity vomit out the window behind her. Then she stood up and screamed, "Whoo fuck yeah!" at the top of her lungs with her face covered in puke. Fuck yeah dude is also in this class, so he immediately screams "fuck yeah" back. Then she yells "fuck yeah" again, and they go back and forth yelling "fuck yeah," getting progressively louder with each one until the teacher gets to her and ushers her out of the room. The rest of us just sat there like, WTF was that all about? Edit, gold and platinum? Fuck yeah. Story 6. A physics class in community college. Professor was explaining conservation of angular momentum and had a kid sit on a tall chair that spins. He then had the kid hold 2 books out with extended arms and then spin as fast as he can before telling the kid to pull the books in close to his chest. Think of a figure skater and how they spin really fast. The kid immediately turns into a blur, and the stool chair starts to tip slightly until it rockets from under him like it was shot from a slingshot. The kid slams into the floor as if he got choke-slammed, and his head hit the floor in a way that sounded like someone dropped an overly ripe melon. The look on the professor's face said, "Well, that was a good run. I guess I have to find a new career now." Kid turned out okay and everyone got a laugh, but it genuinely looked like I had just witnessed a death. Story 7. In a full auditorium, a random guy from a higher year entered. He yelled, "Ladies, this one's for you," and then proceeded to take off his shirt and trousers, his boxers still on luckily. He then flexed his biceps and did different poses in front of hundreds of students sitting there, not knowing how to react. He then left saying, "Sorry to bother you," to the lecturer. Oh well, apparently he bet with his friends to do this for 3 troughs of strong beer. Edit. Typo. Story 8. This happened like 2 to 3 semesters ago at my college. I was in finance class about 10 minutes from it ending, it was around 2:30, and I had to work at 4:30. Planned on hitting the gym between, typical day, was getting ready to go by drinking my pre-workout in the last 10 minutes of class. Well, turns out someone had a different plan. We get an email that the school is in a legitimate lockdown. There's a questionable man on campus with a tactical vest and large backpack walking around campus. Oh boy. So here's the reactions to this information. 50% of the class immediately panics. No idea what to do. Huddles in the corner texting their loved ones. One chick bawling her eyes out, making all of the noise, puked in the corner. Sick. Foreign exchange Studenton whips out his laptop and starts a League of Legends game, getting visibly agitated at it in the back of the room. Fucking Yasuo. Ammirite. Teacher breaks a piece of metal off the vent and stands by the door prepared to what looks like kill Julius Caesar. Professor in the adjacent room, connecting door, walks in and explains that we should all calm down because worst case scenario is we die, and we get a cool plaque with our name on it in the hallway. This does not help the students already having anxiety. May I note, I'm over here, phone dying, absolutely yeeted to on pre-workout with the inability to expend this energy, wondering if I'll get fired for a no-call no-show and feeling 99% pissed rather than scared. Look to the left out the window. SWAT team on the roof. JPG. Had this sketchy man came into our room, I'm of the utmost confidence that he would have walked away without harming a single human, simply because it was apparent that God left this classroom long ago and we were in more hysteria alive than dead. Anyways, 5 hours later, I'm able to call my boss after we were allowed to leave and tell him that the kid who got reported as simply a student going to class and had a big backpack. There was no vest. The student who reported him had already gotten in trouble for trying to start a racial conflict a week prior and just had an agenda to push. The amount of pissed I was immeasurable. Story 9. Had a teacher have a little bit of a mental meltdown in class when she realized that no one really cared about doing the homework and such. She was really sad, and I wish I was a better student for her, and I hope her life is going better nowadays. Story 10. This wasn't my class, but was the talk of the school for a while. A well-liked teacher gave her class a free work day and offered to play some music. Upon opening her iTunes, she found a file named Transformers MP4. Curious, she opened it. It turned out to be hardcore that blasted through the entire class at full volume. Panicking, she couldn't figure out how to shut it off, so she ran the laptop, open and still blasting at full volume down the hallway to the office to reduce exposure to students. It turns out, the superintendent's son used one of the shared servers to browse and download the video, so it was accessible by every computer connected to the school network. The superintendent resigned a couple years later. Story 11. Go into the bathroom and open the door. The professor is there shitting. We make eye contact and I freeze. He slowly reaches for handle to close the door, so naturally, I shake his hand because I'm retarded. Story 12. Not a student anymore, but we had a supply English teacher that had the good old habit of liking a little drink in the classroom. He used to pull a small bottle of vodka out of the drawer and take a small sip every few minutes while trying to be sly about it. Well, after a while, one of the students told a teacher about it. And then the supply teacher was found on his lunch break watching Netflix and drinking a glass of wine in the classroom. Funny thing is, he stayed on as a teacher for another 3 months before being totally kicked out for a similar thing. Story 13. Someone asked, "Meth, can we cook it?" In chemistry, another person asked our math teacher who was going home to Canada over break if she could go threaten to kill his friend who lives there. Same person told the same teacher that he couldn't do the work because he has 100 extra chromosomes. He doesn't. She responded by saying, "That explains why you look like that." Story 14. 9th grade for reference. Everyone was being super loud, so we were pretty much unable to discern anything short of our own table. Just as the teacher is coming in and everyone is quieting down, this one kid is just loudly talking and telling this one girl who looks really fucking uncomfortable, "It's 4 inches." With the most proud voice ever. Story 15. Not in classroom, but kid fell out of the restroom ceiling and broke the whole ceiling. And in a classroom, someone got thrown across the room into a wall. Story 16. I took business English my senior year of high school. We had to do a presentation on a made-up business. 2 kids did a presentation on a frozen yogurt place that was like a make-your-own yogurt thing. You would squeeze the flavors and stuff out of fake cow udders. Straight from the teat was the name of their business. It was a long day. Story 17. Freshman year of college, I had one professor who would randomly call on students in class, and if they didn't answer correctly, he would proceed to give them a roast in front of the whole class for their lack of knowledge on the subject material. I was in the class with a few of my good friends, as it was a prerequisite that we all needed to have. Even though we got our fair share of roasting from him as well, we all thought it was funny, and knew it was his way of making sure the students are engaged in the lecture. About halfway through the semester, he called on one person, and after she incorrectly answered, he started to casually roast this student. At this point, another girl raised her hand to get the prof's attention. After he called on her, she proceeded to vocally berate him about how he was treating us all like children, as well as call him every vulgar word she could think of. At this point, he's shouting back at her too, complete with all the same vulgarities that she used on him. And me and my friends are just sitting in the back, laughing under our breath while simultaneously being completely dumbfounded that this kind of stuff actually happens in college. Finally, he yells at her to leave lecture. She obliges. And as soon as she's out of the room, he proceeds to roast her even more to the class. It was so odd to see something like this, especially since I had just come from high school a few months before. Man, college is wild. Story 18. Ex-student here. This was long ago. We sent whispers around the classroom to all drop our books on the ground, pretending it was by accident. When the clock on the wall hit an exact time, when it happened, our teacher was in the middle of writing on the chalkboard and she turned around, shocked, to find us all picking up our books. She cried after that, and we all started to feel really bad. Learned later she had just had a miscarriage. Sorry, teach, we didn't know and we all liked you. Story 19. I went to a small college and our classroom sizes were very small, 15-25 people, so we got to know everyone pretty well. There was this one guy who came in so stoned that he fell off his chair. Thankfully, the prof was relatively chill, so she let him go home. Not my story, but My friend told me how, on the first day of class during introductions and icebreakers, this girl got up and ran toward the door. She didn't make it and threw up all over the place, looked around her, and completely horrified left the class. She came back for her stuff later. Also, another time, my professor knew I was turning 21 the night before, and when I came in the next morning, completely hungover and dead, he and the whole class applauded me. It was nice. Story 20. Back in 8th grade middle school, we had this really cool and chill U.S. history teacher. He never raised his voice and he was pretty laid back about class and work. He taught in a storytelling kind of manner, and I don't ever remembering annotating any document in his class. Well, we had that one kid. In this story, I'm gonna call him Jim. Jim was always late to class and never turned stuff in. He was that one really cringy kid that everyone either hated or pitied. My teacher never got really fed up with him, but would always show his distaste for him in his facial expressions. My teacher normally would pull him aside to talk to him about his tardiness or missing assignments. Jim would say he would be earlier, do the assignments, but he, of course, never did. One day, Jim walks in late again. My teacher is about to start teaching, and when he turns and sees Jim walking in, well, this time my teacher wasn't so happy about it. It was the middle of the school year towards the end, and my teacher must have gotten so fed up with Jim at that point. My teacher yells Jim's name at the top of his lungs. He normally had a boomy voice, but when he yelled, it amplified 100 times over. The ground literally shook when he yelled, and I'm sure they could hear him from downstairs at the other end of the school. Our school wasn't that small either. For the rest of the class period, about 30 minutes, literally it was dead silent. Everyone was still kind of shocked from it. Story 21. In a graduate-level optics course, final exam. Professor leaves the room for a minute. Instantly, the majority of Chinese students start conferring frantically in Chinese. Everyone's like, WTF? Story 22. I remember being maybe in 2nd grade, and this one kid in our class kept yelling through the window at some 10th, 11th grader that was outside. Our window was easy to climb in and out of as it wasn't placed at a high level from the ground. The dude that was standing outside got annoyed with him, I guess, and just jumped on the window stool, which was pretty wide, and said something along the lines of, "You kid should not be saying things like this. I'm older and won't do anything, but someone in this life will at some point if you keep this behavior," then went back to his friends or whatever, like nothing out of the ordinary happened. Our whole class of 2nd graders was shocked. I know it would have been more interesting if I remembered the details, but it happened a long time ago. Story 23. In 1st grade, this kid climbed on top of a bookshelf and screamed the Superman theme song before declaring he was Superman. The then proceeds to jump off the bookshelf and collides with another kid. Story 24. Okay, so this happened a while ago, so I might not have all the details. So I was on the school bus, and we weren't allowed to eat on the bus. So the kids behind me were talking about lunch tomorrow, and one of them said, "Yeah, I can bring bacon." I was hungry, so I said, "Bacon? Who's bringing bacon?" The bus driver overheard me, but didn't know it was me, stopped the bus and yelled, "Bacon! Who has bacon?" Then he walked down the aisle and looked to see who has bacon. It was so funny, but you kinda had to be there. Story 25. First day of school, freshman year, in woodshop. Teacher just finishes showing us a safety video on proper use of how to use a table saw. Then he was about to give a demonstration and said, "Now, you're going to see me do things a little differently than how you just saw it being done in the video you just watched. But that's because I'm a professional and have been doing this for over 30 years. Teacher then proceeded to immediately cut off 3 of his fingers with the saw at the front of the classroom. Blood was spraying everywhere. He was screaming, holding his hand. Guys I was with in the back of the class starting laughing, thinking it was a prank. Girl in the front of the class projectile vomited. A few of us helped him find his fingers on the floor, went and got the nurse. Simone called an ambulance. They were able to reattach them at the hospital. Wood class was canceled for the rest of the year, and we all took home economics in its place. Story 26. When I was in college, I was sitting in a geology lecture center when someone dressed in a banana costume crashes in, does a lap around the room, then gets chased out of the room by a guy in a gorilla suit who came in after him. Story 27. Was in a math class where a random student fell into the classroom and simply yelled, "You pushed me too hard." He got up and left as if nothing happened. The class laughed their asses off, including my math teacher. It's something I only see in cartoons. Story 28. There was a guy who sat in the front row of one of my classes when I was in community college. He would just bring in fresh vegetable and just eat like squash and cauliflower raw during class. Story 29. 11th grade AP Bio class. One of my classmates was locally renowned for his nonsense. One day he decided he was going to leave, and so he walked to the back of the classroom and hopped out the first-story window and left, in the middle of class. Same guy, same class brought his banjo in one day and had a banjo jam session before class started. Story 30. In the largest lecture hall on campus, there's a large reproduction of George Washington crossing the Delaware hanging above a door. One afternoon during my class in said room, some guy dressed entirely in red, white, and blue with an eagle mask walked in, saluted the painting, and exited. Story 31 was walking to the bathroom. Some of the special needs kids were on their way to recess. One of the girls then screams, bathroom, and proceeds to pull down her pants and on the floor. Another time was when I was outside, walking towards the playground. Everyone started running back towards the buildings. We were being forced back because someone pooped on the walkway. IDK, what is wrong with my school? And story 32. Two girls in a fight. One of them German suplexed the other into a table. I know that sounds like wrestling, but my teacher in 8th grade had an old wooden table next to her desk to hold extra books and stuff. Girls fought over a dude, I think. And after the slapping and hair pulling, it happened. Story 33. When my teacher brought his samurai sword and started yelling random samurai cries, whilst trying to teach us about ancient Japan. Quite the period we had that day. Story 34. No longer a student, but when I was a freshman in high school, there was this guy I knew since middle school who would always get into trouble. Well, one day he told our math teacher that he needed to go to the restroom. Already familiar with his behavior and using the restroom excuse to ditch class, she refused to let him go. He insisted that he had to go, but she refused yet again. Minutes passed and told the teacher that if she didn't let him use the restroom that he was going to on the trash can. Trying to call his bluff, she told him go for it on the trash can. Some of the students didn't think he'd do it and egged him on to do it. He got up from his desk and approached the trash can, which was at the corner right next to the classroom door. He was in the corner for a minute. Then he actually peed in the trash can. The teacher just sat there as it happened, nonchalant-like. I can't remember if he left the class after he pulled it off since it was years ago. But yeah, it cracks me up thinking about that moment. A bonus I should add about the guy. My best friend knew him as well and were even good friends. He once told me that during our sophomore year, the guy got expelled for breaking the door window of the security office. They chased him and caught up to him at a nearby mall. Story 35. So, in primary school, I was around 11, and we had this system of classes visiting the school's library for about an hour to stimulate you to read books. It worked really well. Once a class is finished, a member of that class could go warn the next class, appointed by the teacher, to go to the library. I was appointed to go do that, and pretty proud of it. I knocked the door, opened it, and wanted to say, hey, it's your turn to go to the library. But suddenly I was distracted by what was on the blackboard, the word Mediterranean Sea. In huge letters, this class was being taught about it. So yeah, hey, it's your turn to go to the Mediterranean Sea, is what actually came out of my mouth. Bonus. No one of my own class found out. Extra bonus. The word in our language for library is bibliothèque, but in dialect in those times, another word was boccarige, which translates to bookery, and I think bookery would be a nice word for library. Story 36. When I was a sophomore in HS, there was this one day in my French class where we were going over the homework from the day before. The homework that comes from the book is divided into different sections by letter, so section A, section B, and so forth. At one point going over the assignment, no one was paying any attention to the teacher, and we were just talking to the people around us. She wanted someone to read their answers from the next section, and no one was listening to her. She was getting frustrated at this point, so she raised her voice and said, I want the D. There was 2 seconds of silence followed by everyone busting out laughing. One of those moments that I'll never forget. Edit, reworded some sentences. Story 37. I walked into school after being gone for a day, and I saw the front desk broken perfectly in 2. Apparently, the biggest kid in my grade, a kid named Fisher, had sat on the desk and broken it. Story 38. Had a professor get served divorce papers in the middle of a lecture. Luckily, there was only 20 of us in the classroom and not hundreds in a lecture hall. Story 39. Not in the classroom, but it's still something that happened at school. At the last day of school, the entire high school goes into the theater for assembly. Then, the entire grade presents the students that are leaving, and for every person that is leaving, a friend of theirs will walk up with a microphone and state why they will miss them, their achievements, etc. In our school year, this kid, let's call him John, was a complete. He treated everyone badly and smoked in school, etc. Rumors have it that he was asked to leave at the end of the year and that he was pretty much expelled. But he was still presented by his friend in front of the whole high school. When his friend finished talking, he grabbed the microphone, pointed to our principal, and shouted in it, I'm glad that I'm leaving this school, as I'll never ever have to see your fucking face again. Then he gave the mic to his friend and left via backstage. Everyone was at this assembly, from grade 9 to grade 12. Every teacher, counselor, even the principal and the director of the school was there. There was a huge gasp and everyone was completely silent for the next 30 seconds. Then the next people which are leaving walked up to the stage. So, yeah, that happened. Story 40. Freshman year. I made the horrible mistake of taking Psych 101 at 8 a.m. So, of course, hungover, made it to class, sat down, opened my notebook, and promptly fell asleep. Woke to the professor asking me a question. I answered it accurately. I had taken a similar class in high school. He glared at me and moved on. Then I looked down at my notebook to find page after page of little notes and cartoons from the whole class, mostly themes on, you snore loudly, and you look like an idiot with your mouth hanging open. The shame was strong with me that day. Story 41. Had a girl storm out of class, made a big scene about it, can't remember what it was about. As she was about a meter from the door, she tripped and went headfirst into the door. Most of us was too stunned to do anything good thing. The teacher was on the ball and got her to the nurse's office. Story 42. Probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life right here. It was 7th grade English class and my crush and the first girl I ever made out with was in the class. I don't remember if we kissed before or after this happened, maybe after? Anyway, I let one rip, silent but deadly literally by definition. It smelled so bad that the kids around me started freaking out and obviously my whole body is turning red. It caused such a distraction in the class from people laughing that the teacher made me go in the hall while the stench dissipated. After 5 minutes, I was allowed back in and had to perform the walk of shame past my crush back to my desk that was drowning in Febreze. Story 43. Day before the exam at the review session of a class with 2 sections, both present, the instructors got into an argument over the tested topics. They disagreed academically about whether something was X or Y, and guess fucking what? It was on the exam. Story 44. We were all doing some test thing. Then a student got up, ripped it up, screamed this, then threw a chair at a teacher. Proceeded to them say the teacher bullied her for the whole year. Story 45. I was standing outside the classroom before class. Tim was a popular pothead who played a guitar. Gary was an upperclassman who'd been in some troubles before. Tim had hurt himself somehow, and so he was on crutches. We're standing there. Gary comes walking by with a group of dudes and just yanks one of the crutches away from Tim. "Oh, thanks," Tim says. Gary and the dudes walk off and the bell rang, so I walked in and Tim hobbled on one crutch. The teacher saw, but I guess she thought Gary was supposed to take the crutch for some reason. Class was ending, and Tim complained because he couldn't get to his next class unless he got his crutch back. The teacher apologized for her misunderstanding the situation and phoned the vice principal so that he could try to locate Gary and this crutch. This was not a hard job for the vice principal because Gary had gotten in trouble with him earlier in the day. So he'd stolen the crutch from Tim and promptly burst into the vice principal's office and threatened him with it. Story from the dude standing outside the office was that Gary was swinging crutch around. He knocked over a trash can and was pounding on the desk with the crutch. The vice principal stood across the desk from him with his arms in the air. He kept saying, "Think about what you're doing, Gary. You don't want to be doing this now." I guess that by the time the teacher called, Gary had been de-escalated and disarmed and it was all over, except for figuring out where the crutch had come from. It would have been great if she could have warned him ahead of time. Story 46. This is in a college lecture hall, but it was a large lecture hall, but with not too many students. During class, we heard female moans. At first, we each thought we were hearing things, so nobody responded. 5 minutes later, the moans got even louder, and we turned around to the source. We thought it was probably someone watching who accidentally forgot to plug their headphones in. The dude was knuckles deep fingering the girl sitting next to him. Her short skirt was hiked up. Story 47. I was sitting in my physics class, trying to stay awake because that class is one of the first classes of the day, and I didn't get much sleep the night before. I sit at a table in the back of the class by myself. The table to my left has 2 of my friends and 1 other student sitting at it. I forget exactly what was being taught that day, but I remember my friend suddenly saying things like, "Oh my God, are you all right?" And "Maybe you should go to the nurse." I looked over to see my friends grabbing tissues and giving them to the other student whose nose was bleeding, which wouldn't be such a problem if there wasn't so much blood pouring out from this guy's nose. It was concerning to say the least. Our teacher told him to go and see the nurse. He nodded, stood up, and then heeled out of the room. It was probably the weirdest thing I have seen in a while. Story 48. The lockdown alarm sounded, and we went into lockdown. A little later, a man come pounding the doors yelling, "These damn Dairy Queens don't have chicken nuggets. Only strips." I was trying so hard not to laugh, cause I am weird and laugh when I'm scared or nervous. And eventually the security guard lured him out by saying he'll buy him chicken nuggets from McDonald's. Apparently he didn't have any weapons. And that happened. Story 49. Not really a classroom, but one day after PE, me and my friends were changing out into our regular clothes, when suddenly we hear a commotion in the restroom. Our section of lockers had an almost direct view into the restrooms, so we make our way over there to see 2 of the 6 sinks there were ripped out of the walls by this one football player. This happened in February, and for the longest time until I graduated, I was a junior at the time, the sinks were still ripped out of the wall. One of the janitors must have gotten lazy because the next time we went into the locker room, the sink was haphazardly put back into the wall, only to be ripped out again. The guy who did this has major issues, as another friend said he played gore videos on a classroom projector. Everyone has a school-issued laptop. And I saw him chase the freshmen around the team locker room like a spider monkey, naked. Story 50. I took creative writing in college. The professor was a super laid-back dude who was incredibly passionate about English. Really cool guy. Started the first class by having us listen to Cheap Trick and talking about how words are magical. Then, he came up with what he described as what would be either the best or worst idea he had ever had. Every week, It was a night class, so only one 3-hour-long class a week. He would bring I'm a different alcoholic beverage for the class. Usually it was wine, sometimes beer or hard liquor. We would then get drunk and work on our writing project. The class only had one assignment, write a novel. It was the greatest class I've ever been in. Story 51. I'm sorry if this isn't perfect English since it isn't my first language. This actually happened today. XD. So I was in math class and we were doing something, and I was bored a bit, so I started playing with my slipper, and the teacher thought it was a calculator and said that I have to bring it to her. I said, "This isn't a... Don't you back talk to me." She screamed at me, so I just gave it to her. At the end of the period, I asked if I can get my slipper back. She was confused and looked at the calculator and apologized. At the end of the day, we all had a good laugh. Story 52. One of my classmates was bunking class, and for some reason decided to call someone who was in class at the time. We're not allowed to use phones in class. Our professor then snatches the phone and begins talking over it, only to find out who's on the other end. Needless to say, the kid who bunked class was made to come back and attend class. Story 53. In 5th grade, we did the DARE program. Basically, it teaches you that drugs are bad. Anyways, the police officer gave us all a nickname, and I got Douglas. So a few months later, we had a substitute teacher. We started to tell him our names, and a few kids near me convinced me to tell him my name was Douglas. So the day went on like normal, but nearing the last hour or so of class, this one kid next to me, X, gets pissed that the teacher thinks my name is Douglas. So he gets really mad and goes, "His name's not Douglas. It's GTH Assassin D3N. You're all stupid if you think his name is Douglas." He then proceeded to flip over my desk and start screaming some more. But the funniest part to me was when the substitute said to the kid, "I think he knows his own name X." Yeah, 5th grade was interesting. Story 54. After a few minutes of arguing with a teacher over homework that wasn't done, things settled down and everyone went back to their spot until the student proceeds to throw his math book at one of the windows where a whole chunk of glass just fell out. It didn't shatter or anything. No one was expecting it, and it made the loudest of noises. Story 55. Someone threatened to shoot up my high school over social media during my senior year. 2-3 of my school didn't come to school that day. My AP literature teacher thought this would be a great day to read A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, which, if you don't know, is about a serial killer who ultimately shoots an entire family by the end of the story. She told us to stop worrying about things that would never happen. Our school's administration also made fun of us for panicking the entire day. When they announced over the intercom that the police determined there was no threat, the principal blamed us for letting things get out of hand, that we were overreacting. There was a real school shooting that same day in another state. We went on a school-wide lockdown a few months later because of shots fired in the small neighborhood across the street from the school. Needless to say, I think we had every right to be terrified. Story 56. Junior year of high school, fell asleep on my desk, and the teacher stole my backpack and hid it from me. I didn't know until class ended and I had no backpack. That day, I learned to sleep with one leg through the shoulder strap just in case. Thank you, Dr. Bradley. Story 57. One day we had a sub, and they had us play that Jeopardy review as 2 teams. Our team name ended up being Off Constantly. We threw the game and then got everyone to admit that the other team beat off constantly. Not really anyone picked it up or said anything. Senior year was good. Story 58. Not my story, but my English teacher in high school told it. A little backstory. I went to an ALC center at this time, which is basically a high school for kids with mental problems and bad home life that makes regular high school impossible, extremely difficult. Ours happened to be situated in an old strip mall right next to the Pizza and Pasta. Anyways, it was about 11 a.m., and she was teaching her class when this man just walked in through the front door and into her classroom since it was closest to the front door. He looked around what was very obviously a classroom, a desk, a projector, bookcases, posters about grammar and learning the whole shebang, and looked at the teacher and started asking her if she wanted to buy his steaks. She asked him to please leave as this was a classroom. He insisted that his steaks were high quality and that they were a good price. She asked him again to leave since she was trying to teach. The man turns to the nearest student and starts asking him about buying his steaks. Student just stares at him, not knowing how to respond. My teacher calls in the principal. Principal shows up, man pushes past him and runs out the door and down the street. Teacher just shrugged and went back to teaching. She was a really good teacher and made the kids enjoy being in the class, so no one really wanted to continue talking about it until after class, so that they could continue the lesson. A few years after that and a few more incidents of people just walking in, we got a new door with security measures on it. It's still a joke around the school as far as I know to randomly say, "I got some high-quality meat," in a weird accent.